Hello and welcome back to Coffee Break. My name is Faith Jacobs, and today we are talking about a project that my heart has been poured into over the last three books, and it is called Faithfully Yours, Mozart. It is not only an audio drama, but also a series of books, three of which are currently available to purchase internationally via Amazon.com. Today on Coffee Break and for World Autism Acceptance Month, I am joined by two of our leads from the audio drama production, Aaron Relf and Darien Thompson. Darien will be joining us later due to having something to do this morning, but she's coming. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode, Aaron. Now, before we begin and dive into my questions, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you voice for the production?
Course. So my name's Aaron Relf. I voice Mozart himself. Fantastic role. And a bit about myself. So yeah, I am a autistic, dyslexic, and dyspraxic professional actor who works professionally in the industry, mainly stage, but I've sort of crept into voice, audio drama, and singing as of recent.
Nice, nice. So we're gonna begin with some starter questions, and I wanted to specifically touch on Mozart in the world of disability. Now, in the
Yep.
series, we don't necessarily give Wolfgang a label, but I would say it's very obvious that he's autistic and that he does face some kind of neurological challenges. How would you say not necessarily putting the label on him, partially because you almost can't because it's not really a label in his era, but how would you say that differs from current representation? And do you think it worked against coming into this project or for it?
Um, I think the writing that you've done showed it brilliantly, but it also showed it historically accurate. It was great because obviously back then, with something like autism, it wasn't known. Um, it was a condition that nobody knew about. So for me personally, taking on that role, it was familiar because I recognized the signs in the writing that he was neurodiverse, but I also loved how it wasn't outright spoken, as it wasn't back in those days.
Right, right. Um, and Wolfgang's part in the story is not about him as this eccentric composer as per past films and plays have done. In fact, I would say there's very few scenes where he even directs an opera or teaches music, because that story's been told. And for anyone listening, if
Yep.
you want that story, I will list films in the description where you can find that. But as I've said to you before, and as my marketing says, this is a story of humanization. We are humanizing Mozart as much as we are Constanza. We're treating them like people. Now, how does it make you feel to be a part of something that for the first time isn't making fun of a historical figure, but one who was possibly disabled, as I believe he was, as well as the story that actually gives a voice to one who loved him fiercely?
It's beautiful. It's taking Mozart outside of the fame that we saw of him, making him more human and giving him a connection to Constanza, which it brings a more human side to his character. You know, neurodiversity aside, it's lovely how this story we get to see his life outside of the fame, which we don't very often get to do. And yeah, it was fascinating as well for me as an actor researching him because a lot of research out there, you have to really dig deep to try and find the personal life of him. But it was interesting to see how your story and how the actual facts crossed over brilliantly.
Thank you. Yeah. What would you say was probably one of the most challenging scenes to have performed? for this book in particular?
Yeah, I would say a couple of scenes, but also the most fun as well, even though they were the most challenging. One is every time he was ill and trying to work out what different illness plus the symptoms and how you would sound with that type of illness. And then every time he got overwhelmed and overstimulated and things like that, it brought a real raw experience because
Right.
being neurodiverse myself, I know what it's like to be in that situation.
Yeah, I would say, and I just got the lines quite recently, and I'm still working through trying to episode 7 for anyone who has listened to our audio drama. Episode 7 is going to be a really, really, really long episode, so it's going to take a while to make to put together. It's probably the biggest episode, and they just continue to get bigger because that's what I did to myself. um, but but uh, well, when you're sitting there thinking it's just gonna be me in the page and stuff happens, but um, there's a sequence that comes later in the series where he is confronted by what will eventually be his mother-in-law. And I would say that that was the most raw and visceral scene to hear with the two actors, with Taba, who voices Cecilia, she's our German actress, and you as well, because you captured exactly how it feels as for me as well, because I've been in those situations. And I think I think tackling Wolfgang's meltdowns was definitely a challenge both as a writer and as a director.
Yeah,
Because I've
I
played
mean,
those scenes.
as an actor, it was the hardest thing I found with doing it was I used the technique of basically emotional memory. So I sort of dove deep into when I felt those experiences and how I felt. And then I thought, okay, going from the research that we've got for Mozart, how does he cope with that without no support that we've got today? So it was, yeah, it was a real difficult time in the booth because it was sort of obviously I switched that side on, but then it was also nice to go, wow, that really worked, and that really worked at the end. It sounds really nice.
Yeah, it's I don't know how to describe it. I've played those scenes myself as an actor. You know, the best directors are those who were actors for a very brief period of time, and
Hmm.
I've had my fair share. And I've been in those, and I remember I had to do it twice for my very first project where I ever had to sort of act out an autistic meltdown, and it's raw and it's visceral and it's real and Aaron and I have two different techniques. I'm more of a solely a Meisner actor, but it at that time I don't think I was. When I think it was very unintentional, as you say. What was the emotional evocative memory?
Emotional
Emotional
memory,
memory.
emotional
I
memory. Okay,
definitely
yeah.
pulled from that a couple of times, and so I know how that can feel when you're untrained.
Hmm.
And I was a very raw actor at that time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to look at it from the director perspective because you're like, should I be in the booth with you as you're like you doing this? Um, you
Yeah.
know, because and I have been. I have sat across from actors when they've done that.
It's, I think the important thing is if you do use it, it's knowing where the line is to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for any artist that uses that technique, especially if you're if you're a neurodiverse performer as well, because you focus so much on the sensory feelings of that situation that it can get a bit overwhelming. So it's very important to know, okay, this is the line. I'm going to stop
That's
at this line.
that's true. At the core of the story, of course, is the romance between Mozart and Constanza, tackling their courtship, which was said to be historically difficult. But unlike most takes, ours is not that typical Mozart romance where it's a spectacle or even just a blip. There are very few
Mm.
biopics out there that really do the love story any justice, and I would say they actually do more harm than good. With ours, however, I based an element of truth off a line in Wolfgang's letter, in which he says, "At the time I gave up my situation, my love had not begun. It first arose while living with them, from her tender care and affections." This simple phrase gave me pause to consider that Wolfgang's romance was not one built on anything but kindness, as he talks about Constanza having a kind heart in multiple times in his letters. I'm curious, why do you think no one has tackled their courtship in this manner? And what were your feelings on the way that we've tackled it here?
I think people, it's that thing of going back to focusing on the fame of the person rather than what that person at his core was. Um, there are loads of great productions out there of Mozart, but yeah, none of them do tackle the relationship right. Some of them tackle it in a way that it wasn't a good relationship, which, to be fair, they as we know, they do have,
Yeah, they
as
have their
all relationships
they
do.
have their fights, but it's
Yeah,
like they don't tackle the relationship, I think, with the building blocks of what we consider a relationship. It's like they met, they kissed, and then
yeah,
they got married, and it's like
yeah.
that's not how it realistically it
No,
would not have developed in the way that it's often made out to happen.
exactly. Yeah, and so I feel with this one, it gave it time to naturally flourish, naturally actually feel like a proper on-screen relationship that is real.
And
Um,
I wanted
yeah,
them to be, like I've said so many times before, a Mr. Darcy and an Elizabeth Bennet. But if we reverse
absolutely.
some traits.
Yeah, yeah, and that as an inspiration, it clearly works. It clearly brings to it. But I think again, it's props to you and the research you've done to find that there was, that strong bond between them, despite what a lot of creatives have done, which has gone totally the opposite route.
Yeah, it often seemed to me like they made the relationship out to be so shallow when you read the actual history, and I have many biographies by people who either personally knew Mozart or personally knew Constanza, and the testimonies of her sisters, particularly Sophia. I just learned a new story, and I can't wait to somehow ingrain it into the next couple of books. But
Mm.
one time, some servant stumbled into their bedroom, and Constanza was sick, and he was writing, and he's trying to get this servant out of their bedroom, and the knife that he uses to sharpen his pen gets jammed in his thigh, and he doesn't make a noise. And he doesn't tell his wife. It's like, by the way, while you were asleep, I got a knife stuck in me. Sophia's there, and she tends to the wound, and he doesn't make a peep. And if you know the story of Wolfgang, he he doesn't whine or complain, but his bedside
No.
manner's not great.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, but it's stuff like that where you go, wow, he was so concerned about her that that he shuts up, he clamps up whenever he gets a knife jammed in his thigh.
I mean, that is typical Mozart, though. Throughout, you see him in those situations, which, you know, you do sort of find hilariously funny. But I think it brings humor as well to their relationship. These moments that he's done are brilliant.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you sit there and go, "This is what we need people talking about in those stories, not not the I mean, the highlights I understand, but we almost need something more in depth because there's so much more in depth there." You know, you have
Yes.
silly moments like he's traveling in a way and is like, "By the way, honey, I had a first-rate argument with some mice." Um, no.
My favorite one that I've done was I always say it, 'cause I love it. Even to this day, it's great. The oh, shall we
Shall
dance?
we
Just
dance?
straight into that. Just straight into that.
Hey, we've had a fight, we've had a row, let's dance.
Yeah, that is just peak Mozart. I always think if I'm ever doing a scene with him in a situation like that, I always refer back to that one because that is just peak Mozart right there.
Yes, and fully based on so much. Let's simplify a little bit. But I wanna since we're gonna be talking about some big topics once Darian is able
Yeah.
to join us as well. But I'm curious, how do you feel sort of being one of three known individuals to step into the shoes of Wolfgang, using your authentic voice as a neurodivergent actor and portraying someone, who you yourself has said multiple times that you really feel seen in?
Hmm. Um, to be fair, I've always been shocked that I ever got the opportunity to do it. Um, yeah, I'm so grateful for this, to have the opportunity of actually playing Mozart and discovering this character. And beforehand, I knew of him because I like history, but I knew of him as the performer. I never really, went into his backstory. And then when I did, I just fell in love with his story in a completely different way. Um, and I think it does make you go, wow, when you think all the other people that performed him, yet we got to perform in such a different way. I think that's the thing that I am most proud of is how different our version was.
Absolutely, and it's a unique world to definitely play in, and to have the amount of books out that are coming out for it right now. Actually, in a couple of days, the third novel will be available in paperback, and if you'd like to see how they would have treated somebody like Mozart, um, you definitely please catch up on the first two books and then into the
Mm,
third, because the third novel is a roller coaster that I wish, if we had all the money in the world, I would be producing, because there are some scenes that I think would really hit with, especially with everything going on in the world today in relation to autism and disability. Um,
yeah,
I think it will still hit. You just have to pick up the novels. Um, on that note, why might it be important for modern society to reevaluate how we look on historical figures, beginning with Mozart and moving forward with people like, say, Jane Austen, who some believe was autistic herself? If we really look on those who were more than likely disabled in the past and treat it as fact rather than speculation, how might looking at history with the lens of neurodivergence impact our generation and then the next?
I think it's important to do. As somebody that's huge on history, I there's so many people in history that I think we need to reevaluate and look again and go, okay, are they on the spectrum? What was, their personal life like? A big favorite of mine, I've said countless times, is Shakespeare. I think he, just like Mozart, is neurodiverse, yet trying to find the information for him, like Mozart, is difficult. Um, sort of how, you know, far back it was. But there are countless times, I think, throughout history. And why not reevaluate? With everything we know now, the science we've got now, why not look and see what's come before to learn something new?
Absolutely. And I sit there and think about that all the time. You have people debating things, and I'm like, I feel like it's just so obvious. It's like we have the science now. It's clear that there were those who were disabled in history far before the things that we have now, and they had different factors and environmental factors than we did. So why are we arguing about things that aren't true? I will be vague, but I'm very staunchly against something that's happening recently. And a viewpoint that's happening recently. I think it's horrible. Why are we arguing about things that we know aren't true when people in the past were disabled long before the science that you say is the reason why we have disabilities now? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like,
It's
unless you're ignoring history that's right in front of your
it,
face.
it's got to be right, surely. Like, my view on it is that neurodiversity hasn't just appeared out of nowhere. It's always been there.
Mhm.
It's just we've never had the ability to find it. Now we've got it.
Yeah. And
Why not explore?
and we acknowledge it now because, I
Yeah.
mean, think about it. In Mozart's day, there was still a stigma against epilepsy. In 1785, they still considered epilepsy something that's been around since 55 AD in the Grecian days. Like, they still considered it divine intervention or witchcraft.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that tell you? Stigma. And that same applies
Mm,
to all kinds of disabilities, whether it was feeble-mindedness in someone like Henrik Gottfried Bach, or autism and
yeah.
ADHD in Mozart.
Um, but no,
Oh, something just happened. I think you just dropped
oh,
for a minute?
oh,
I don't know what happened. It's okay. Um,
cool.
so I think we're still recording?
But
Um, so sorry,
it says
something happened.
it says we are.
Okay, thank
It
God.
says we are.
Okay. I was a little
Um,
concerned.
so yeah. No, so what I was going to say was, just in case it dropped off, um, it's the thing with Mozart that was the most saddening was when he himself sort of had to believe he had to fix himself, and he went off obviously to a hospital and went under some really like horrible, I would call them torture almost,
Yes.
what he put him through.
Yes.
It was, yeah,
And
horrible.
I wouldn't be too hard pressed to believe if in between, like, that something how do I put this? I wouldn't be too hard pressed not to believe that something like that didn't happen to Mozart?
Mm, yeah, yeah.
I'm
The evidence is there in terms of that's what they did to patients.
mhm.
It is possible, you know.
And the thing about doctors in that time was you were supposed to fear them. And
Yeah,
I can't imagine, like, being as sick as he was all his life and facing all these men poking and prodding and doing all these things that they do to him, and then to go and be so different, and you're still surrounded by doctors in your adult life, and they're still treating you like, well, what's wrong with you?
it really brings about the element of, again, we need to look in the past to see all the stuff, to sort of open it up in a new way and to discover what we haven't discovered before.
I agree, and this sort of ties in, as we've been talking, specifically for you, as you've been saying, then I was going to ask the question of why do you feel it's important that we acknowledge a figure like Mozart being neurodivergent? Because as we've been
Hmm.
talking, like, there are so many who say it's not ethical or reasonable to assign a form of diagnosis to historical figures, but to me, I think that seems rooted in, like, ableist thought. Why then might it
Yeah,
actually be imperative, in your perception, to have figures like Mozart who can embody that we, the disabled, the autistic, and the neurodivergent, as you said, we're always there in history?
I think one is role models. specifically for um, male neurodivergence, speaking as somebody who's got autism, it's hard sometimes to actually have a role model that is neurodiverse.
Yes.
And it's nice in history that there are people now, like I discovered Mozart when I was doing research, and like it brings that sort of sense of, okay, so it is possible to do all these amazing things, even though, people have said that you can't because you've got this label.
Yeah.
There's proof that somebody has done it before that label was even invented.
Yeah. I agree, and that kind of brings me into this question where, so many people told me while I was writing and trying to cast for this thing initially. One person quite literally said to me, "Oh, it's so limiting. I was told it was limiting for me to cast a neurodivergent who can sing and act, because apparently those don't always line up." And I sat there kind of baffled. Because, number one, I know a plethora of disabled individuals who can sing. Several of them are my colleagues, by the
Hmm.
way. There's one being Emma Nicolau. She's she's
Yeah.
open about her ADHD. Has the voice of an angel. You should go listen to her. And so do many other actors and singers, including Darien, who I can't wait to have her on, and we'll speak to her and hear what she's got to say as well. But in my humble opinion, many of my disabled colleagues are actors and singers. Another colleague of mine, Rob Milton, is also a singer. We're all in a variety of spectrums here. And then to be told that it's
Yeah.
limiting, that I should not speculate on historical figures, and that my language was corrected in regards to the word of a diagnosis. So, as you and I have been talking, Aaron, I'm kind of curious, why do you think people can't wrap their heads around what is right in front of them about Wolfgang? And why does it almost offend them?
I think it's because it's a difficult, I think it's the unknown, personally. We've been treated in like different ways throughout history in so many harsh ways. And I think that people are almost scared for change.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a sense, I feel, that people are now they're becoming more used to neurodiversity, but it's still not there 100%. And I think with the case of Mozart, the reason why they look at people in history and see if they are neurodiverse or not and don't like to comment is because they're scared of, well, what does that change for us as humans? What happens now?
I I agree, and I feel like in some ways it's almost like they're saying, "Oh, we did this, like we treated we tr because it was mainly neurotypical people around Mozart who treated him quite poorly." And I
Yeah.
feel like if we it's like society is saying, if we can treat somebody as brilliant as Mozart in such a bad way, and we've continued the cycle of treating disabled people badly into the modern era, that then reflects
Mm.
poorly on us. Well, yes,
Yeah.
why shouldn't it? You know what I mean? It's like you
Yeah.
had someone as brilliant as Mozart, and there has never been another, and probably never will be another. But you
Mm.
sit there and you go, maybe I'm the problem. It's me, the neurotypical bully. Um, you know, and you
Yeah.
sit there and you go, you do you understand the material that you're looking at? You know?
And some countries in the world sadly don't have any support still
No.
for neurodiversity today, and that always, yeah, that always annoys me when I hear that. It's like sometimes, you know, I'm so glad for the support I've got here as a performer. England's pretty good, but there are countries that don't have that support, and it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of some things in the States that really, 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 really could use progressivism. I ain't gonna lie.
Mm.
But I kind of think if we stopped thinking in the hypothetical and we treat everything that we see in Wolfgang's story according to his real letters as facts. And we look at it from specifically the disabled perspective. Wolfgang is 100% a neurodivergent man. From his stimming to his
Yeah.
music, his hyperfixations. I don't know if it's just me, but have you ever seen a neurotypical spend hours on something that's like with the kind of passionate energy that we as neurodivergent people do? Does the neurotypical forget to eat and drink? I mean, it's said that Wolfgang had to be chased away from the piano, or he might not sleep. And all that, is it truly so hard to write him with the respect that he's due? And why does it seem to you, Aaron, having voiced him for so long now, that Wolfgang is often a caricature, he's a stereotype in most cases and not a person? How might modern ableism and modern misunderstandings contribute to all this?
I think personally, the reason for that is how he's been written. He throughout like history, stories about him have been written very caricature. You know, the Mozart we picture without, if you don't do any like intense research on him, if you just picture Mozart, you think the caricature version of Mozart, the composer.
In Amadeus.
And I think, yeah, exactly, that's like the perfect example. And there's so more to it than that. You know, that is not the real Mozart. That's literally I almost like to say that's him masking, you know?
Yes.
Like and then the real one that we see, which is in private, is with obviously or is with Constanza and his family. And that's the interesting part that nobody thinks about. They just think about him in the spotlight, but he's just putting on a mask there. He's just performing there. That isn't the real person.
I agree. So disability was the crux of Wolfgang's world, as we've been saying. He knew sign language, believe it or not. He was surrounded by disability in Vienna with two blind composers, one of which he composed a spectacular piece of music for. He would meet Beethoven, who would later lose his hearing. So why do you think it is so hard then for people to understand, believe, or simply say, rather than treat it as speculation, that Wolfgang himself was disabled and had clearly no prejudice against those who were also disabled in his circles? If he himself really was the odd duck that he refers to himself in the story, wouldn't it make sense for him to find more comfort in the presence of those no different than himself? Why might you, Aaron, might feel that this is kind of overlooked in most stories about Wolfgang?
I think because to get on in the world that he lived in, he had to uh, be social with all walks of life. Otherwise, he would never have got the work or the connections that he needed. Um, but I think that deep down, he wasn't always the biggest fan of those social interactions and probably did prefer more being more sociable with, people that are more neurodiverse. And that's why I also believe that obviously Darien would have more to say on this, but that's why I believe that when Constanza's there, I believe she could have had something on the spectrum.
Yeah,
I see it.
I do too. The more I think about it, I was asked a question by somebody on my YouTube channel if I thought that Constanza could have been neurodivergent. And the more I think about it, the more I think about some of her, her skills and some of the things that were unusual for a woman at her time, I sit there and go, well, she was good at numbers. Like, really good at numbers, and so was Wolfgang. And I'm sure, because Wolfgang was a numbers autistic, that he looked at that and went, she's perfect!
Dating through numbers.
Flirting through numbers, it was like, great. Now here's what... Can you just imagine him just dropping, numbers puzzles?
Yeah, yeah. That'd be quite funny.
And I can just see it just now. Like, like there are so many things about their relationship, and maybe from your perspective, I'll ask you some questions about right now. What was your perception of their relationship when you first got the script? Like how did you
Human.
approach that, and how, in the scenes from Mozart's side of things?
Yeah. Um, he was himself completely in those moments. He's very human. The writing definitely. But for me, with the performance side of it, he it's interesting. It's that thing of how do people date when on the spectrum? It's not the same as two, neurotypical people dating.
Right.
Totally different. And so it was going into, okay, well, what is dating like anyway for somebody who's neurodiverse? What does that feel like? How does that, what different feelings would you get in that situation? And yeah, there's a lot of research on how that is because it is different. It is. A lot of people, who are autistic struggle to read signs as clearly as somebody that's not autistic. That so it's not a dating somebody with neurodiverse is very special because it's one of the most like unique dating experiences you would have. And I feel that with Mozart and Constanza, there was definitely that element of uniqueness. There was almost like the actual love and care that you have, but then childlike moments when they were just playing with each other,
Right.
and running around outside in the forest, and it it was beautiful.
I always loved the scene. It's probably one of my favorite. It was probably one of my favorites to write. It's right before the ballroom dance that they have at the spring
Mm,
masquerade. But they're just on the, like Mozart's standing or he's sitting down on the couch. He's reading this epic poem or something. And then all of a sudden, like like they jump into like playing pirates or whatever, and and it's so sweet, that chemistry between them, and I would always love it when you would like do the imitation of the animal sounds, because that's how I imagined Wolfgang was. That he just,
yeah.
like he would imitate birds or animals or dogs or something, like whatever noise, he heard. The echolalia, he would just mimic it, and
Hmm.
just to be funny, which is, partially something I related to as well, because I'm kind of the same way. When I let my
Yeah.
mask down, and I'm not afraid to be myself, I do those silly little stupid things.
Yeah, same. I stim quite a lot in my own, free time when I'm not masking too. And it was those sort of moments that I actually brought into the thing. It's quite funny really, but like the animal sounds that you mentioned, things like that, it was part of me being an actor, but part of my autistic brain wanting to stim them, which was which had to it as well. I was like, okay, I'll let them both. I'll do it just for
but
you.
it
And then it
but it
worked.
works out because, it just there is something that is so, I don't know, authentically like relatable about Mozart in those moments where, he's rambling about birds. I have a favorite scene from book two where there was a famous story where he couldn't sit still for his hairdresser.
Hmm.
And so he comes in and he's like, "Oh, Stanzi, how are you?" And the hairdresser's like, "He's hopeless. I can't get him to sit still." And she's like, "Honey, just tell me about the birds." "Oh yes, canaries." He just rambles on about birds for like a couple of minutes or something, and I'm just like blah 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 blah, starlings, starlings, you know. Um, And I feel like if I could just get this series out to a wider market, there would be, I think, many people who would sit there and go, I do that too. And because he unlike, I think, most, and I hope I've done this right, because I write a lot of male characters on the spectrum. Because when I was growing up,
Hmm.
I was surrounded by boys who were a lot like you, and a lot like my friend Jack, and a lot like my friend Rob, and like the kinds of people that I am surrounded by now. I was surrounded by similar people as a young girl, and so a lot of
Yeah.
writing Wolfgang and writing Jacob and writing all the autistic characters I have ever written were really based upon a lot of the friends that I had. And not when I was seeing on TV. I was like, clearly you've never been around an autistic boy before, because that's not at all how it is. And so
No.
writing Wolfgang felt so natural because it reminded me very much of many of the boys that I grew up surrounded by. And they were naturally curious and kind and sweet and unintentional, and sometimes they get things wrong, but they didn't, mean anything by it. They just didn't know. And so writing Wolfgang was so natural in that way. Because he is sweet, he is playful, he is innocent, and he's very trusting, sometimes to his own downfall.
I think that's where a lot of, people on the spectrum relate to him a lot. It's what I saw in when I was looking at him and went, oh yeah, I totally get that. I totally understand where he's coming from. Yeah, that sort of innocence and sweetness, and yeah, a lot of people are like that on the spectrum.
And
And it's fascinating how he was.
yeah, and I want to sort of bring up, but as we've been talking about the subject of romance and the neurodivergent
Hmm.
element to it, that there is the misconception that, like, we don't want love, that we don't seek it. And I think that's why the romance with Constanza and Wolfgang hasn't been tackled, because maybe they look on him like the savant type, and I don't. He was
Mm,
definitely not a savant. He had elements of
no.
genius, but I don't think he was a savant in the way that like somebody would write him, and my cringe here for Rain Man. Um, but like,
Yeah.
I find that to be a heartbreak when we live in an era with shows like, although it's a controversy, Love on the Spectrum, and we still have some shows that do treat us like stereotypes, even though there are the
Oh.
beginnings of neurodivergent relationships in fiction. I still feel like they want the word
Hmm.
autistic in your face. And like we said before, they really wouldn't, that label didn't exist. A bit of a trigger warning, they would have called Wolfgang something that starts with an R-E and ends with T-A-R-D-E. Um,
Yep.
and it's a French word. It means to hinder. So every time an ableist person says this word, they're calling you a hindrance. And I do not condone this
Hmm.
word. I hate it with a passion. But Wolfgang would have been called that in the time period. Now, my question to throw to you is, how do you feel about having a story that tackles the ableism and of loving someone who was disabled in an era where that was probably more prominent and much worse than today, even though we have a society that still remains ableist?
Yeah. I mean, today's society still has a lot to improve on in that area, but back then, like, I mean, in my country, we have laws. You can't, if you walked up to somebody and said that word, you could seriously get done by the law. Back in Mozart's day, you could walk up to somebody and say that and you'd be fine. It wouldn't seem bad. In fact, you wouldn't be the one
Mm-hmm.
punished, but the person you said that to would be punished. It was harsh back
Mm-hmm.
then, I would say, very harsh, and there was no laws protecting anyone with neurodiversity. In fact, like I said, the laws went against them in a lot of areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You know, um, and it's surprising when you look back at the history of things. Like I said, book 3 specifically tackles the hardest of
Mm-hmm.
moments where Wolfgang's like, well, it must be something wrong with me, so I'm gonna go get myself fixed. In a very,
Yeah.
if you're familiar with Queen Charlotte and the Madness of King George, I implore you, please don't look at the Madness of King George as a comedy, because it's not. It's actually quite sad, and I shed more than a few tears watching that, although it really
Yeah.
helped in the writing process. Um, for that third novel, because it's true. It's King George, a lot like Mozart, was in an era that did not understand what they were looking at.
No.
And to think that Mozart's doctors were treating him with things that probably killed him, because they didn't understand psychologically and physiologically what was wrong with him.
It was very experimental,
Yeah.
and you, it would be interesting. I mean, you've probably done a lot more research on that, but I imagine a lot of people did sadly pass from that experimental treatment.
Yes, they really did.
Mm.
And to be honest with you, Mozart would not have survived if he had been subjected to that. Realistically,
Mm-hmm.
that he had might have caused him to have a little bit of a. I mention it, I think, in book 1, that Wolfgang has a bit of a weak heart. He
Yeah.
does not have a. It's not very well, from illness. So him going through that treatment, if Constanza hadn't stepped in, realistically, he probably would have died, and people did die
Mm.
from
Yeah.
those treatments.
It's I I don't know what they were thinking. To be fair, it's barbaric what they used to do.
Yeah, yeah. We're
Yeah. I'm glad that like a lot of the systems of those of like asylums and whatever are now shut, especially in like England
Yeah,
as time progressed through the 90s, the last asylum shut in the UK.
yeah. I feel like in the 90s as well over here, the last asylum for those with autism did I'm trying to think, like, I think it was like 99 in the States when it
Mm,
actually last closed, and like that's not that long ago.
no,
It's like people sit there and think that, like, oh, all the insane asylums and the mental institutions where the disabled were kept in the late 19th century, that was a 19th century problem. No, we had it in the
no,
20th and the 21st century as well. We had it in this modern day century. We just don't talk about it enough, you know? Which
no,
is why I appreciated Queen Charlotte and the Madness of King George kind of showing, it's like, look, this is torture. Um, it's like this is what they would do, you know? And I feel like it was
we're
important to show it.
the the company that I'm part of, they've just done a show called Housemate,
Mhm.
and that was basically a musical based on a band with somebody with Down syndrome in, and it's a true story set in Cardiff where the person with Down syndrome, he was in one of those asylums, and his band, whatever, worked to basically close the asylums. Really interesting story in history as well, that one.
Agreed. Oh, and I should say that Darien is on her way. She is just reached out to me that she's coming about 10:49 our way, so we
Cool.
it won't kick you out of the room if I stop the recording, I promise.
Cool.
So we'll be back. We'll be back one moment. And welcome back to part 2 of our Faithfully Yours Mozart discussion. We are happy to have Darien Thompson here. And before we jump into our second part, Darien, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you voice on the project and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Hello, my name is Darien H. Thompson. I'm a voice actor. I voice the amazing Constanza Weber in Faithfully Yours. Um, I also do a lot of other acting projects. For example, I am currently in a strategy RPG called HexoQuest, which is due to come out whenever, really. Uh, I'll leave that up to the amazing team behind it. So I'm very excited to be a part of that. I'm also in an indie open world horror game called Pinewood Valley, and I play one of the killers, so I'm very excited for that. That comes out, I think, sometime this year on PlayStation. So it's my first PlayStation debut. So
Wow! You're
yeah,
awesome.
thank you very much. I have a bit of background in singing as well. I have training in acting as well. I went to school for it. I've done a bunch of workshops with some actors in the industry, especially Sean Mendham, who is a phenomenal actor. For those who may know, he was Scratch in Baldur's Gate 3. So it was an absolute honor to be a part of the workshop. I learned so much, and I am also a Twitch streamer. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we began with Wolfgang, of course. We all know who Mozart is. But let's sort of switch over to Constanza. The
Hmm.
question I'm going to throw at you, Darien, is as the voice of such a forgotten heroine, she was a woman who's been left behind in history. She was the founder of the Mozarteum. She gave us Mozart's legacy. As the voice of her, you voice both 20-some-year-old Constanza in 1781 and the elder Constanza in 1826. What were your first thoughts when you read about Frau Weber after our first initial meeting? And there is a second part to this, but let's focus on the first.
Hmm. I think my first impression when reading about Constanza for sure is she has a lot of there's a lot of history there. But what I truly loved was she preserved Mozart's legacy so beautifully. Um, she gives this air of strength, and she's extremely independent. Um, and uh, I just love how she just has such. I think the biggest thing is strength. And when I read about her, I'm just like, um, I was amazed, you know? I like reading about, especially women back in those days where you don't hear a lot about. You only hear snippets. And with Constanza, she held on to her husband's legacy so beautifully and only wanted to share the good word about him. And yeah, that was really my first impression was how strong she is and how well she carried herself, you know?
I agree. I agree. The second part in that is, what kind of research, if any, did you look into in order to understand her? I feel that in the early days of this, we had a very lengthy conversation about her for context. But did you know anything about Constanza prior to this? And if so, how did that, combined with further research, help you to understand her as a person?
So I knew about Mozart before Constanza, fun fact, because I am also a music enthusiast. And in high school, we talked a lot about concertos and whatnot. So Mozart was a big focal point. I learned about Constanza because I would research composers like Beethoven and whatnot. And when I learned about Constanza was through research. Uh, and unfortunately, there was a scene from one of the Mozart movies. I think it was a Requiem. It was either Requiem for a Dream, one of them. And I didn't know who Constanza was. And then further research showed, oh, that was his wife. And so I'm like, okay. So when we had our first initial meeting, when you were presenting me the project of Constanza, I was just like, oh, I already know who this is. And so I already had a brief idea of who Mozart and Constanza, who they were. I didn't know fully who Constanza was until you were showing me excerpts and all the research you've done. And then what I did as an actor was I read the pieces through and through, and I would take from different inspirations. It could be different places, different pieces of history, and I just went with it. So I had an idea of who she was. So I'm like, okay, I have a baseline. Let's start there. So it was kind of it was a step by step, and with your direction, I'm like, okay, I have an idea. And then, because I just wanted to really emulate the strength she has and highlight that. So pretty much that's what the research was. Yeah.
Good, good. So there's a line from, um, one second. So I wanted so Aaron and I earlier were talking about, um, like, I asked him what he thought about portraying, someone who is, like, using his authentic neurodivergent voice to portray someone who he said he really felt seen in. And the same question does apply to you as well. Now, although Constanza might not have necessarily been a neurodivergent woman, or perhaps she was, we'll never quite know, how do you feel stepping into the shoes of someone who historically seemed to champion her husband, despite all the oddities and, because of the time period, unexplainable quirks?
Hmm. I think it was definitely eye-opening. Because in the industry we're in, I feel people look at folks who are neurodivergent and are seen as so vastly different that we couldn't be like everyone else. So it was a very important role for me. And a lot of it came from personal experience because I have people in my life who are still in my life today, who stand by me, even knowing I'm neurodivergent. And I think that's what I love so much about Constanza was her love never wavered, knowing Mozart's quirks and mannerisms. Like, she never saw him as something other than himself. And it wasn't, always pointed out or she never pointed it out, she never highlighted. It was more just she accepted him. That's what I really love about stepping into this role, because it's like, I know what it's like when I have people in my life who champion me and my things in life and what I want to do. So it was a very good Lord, I'm getting emotional, excuse me.
It's okay.
um it was a very important role to be somebody who champions their other half for who they are. And I think it was written in such a beautiful way where it's there, but it isn't directly pointed out, and that's why I love how beautifully written she is she accepts him wholly. And I think that's the beauty of their love story, is accepting someone as they are, not trying to change who they are, not making fun of them or belittling them. So yeah, I think this was a very important role because it's more than just championing his music, it's championing him as a
Yeah,
human being.
She
Yeah.
champions who he is, and even, I think I said this before, and Aaron, you can maybe speak to this too, because we're going to talk about this a little more, but in the scenes when they fight, they're never fighting with each other. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
it's like you have those moments of drama in the series, of course, but I always asked myself one question: are they fighting for each other on the page, or are they fighting with each other? And if they're fighting with each other, then the scene's not going to work. It has to be, I'm always fighting for him, or I'm always fighting for her. And in those scenes, what would go through like both of your heads? I'm kind of curious. You recorded separately, but we did do a chemistry read, and so what did kind of go through your heads in the moments where they're fighting for each other, not necessarily against each other?
I think that for Mozart's point of view, I think it was him looking at trying to, in his own way, care for her, but also struggling to work out, obviously, how his own feelings were in that situation. He fought a lot through his life, and he fought a lot of different challenges through his life. And I feel that he didn't want, like when he, in the later books, as we talked about, he wanted to try and fix himself. He didn't want to, um, he
He didn't
didn't
want
want
to
to
be,
push her down into
yeah,
his problems.
didn't want to be a
But
burden.
so he was, yeah, he wanted to fight for her in that way and try and be the best he could to be for her. The interesting thing was him being himself, I think, was the best thing.
Exactly. Darien, you have anything to add? I want to hear you as well.
Yeah. I think Aaron described Mozart beautifully, because that's how I thought when I read, like, because I never just read. For me as an actor, I like to read all the lines on the page because context is so important, especially if you're recording separately. So when we did a chem read, I wanted to hear exactly how Aaron was going to do Mozart because it gives me an idea. I'm like, okay. So when it came to the fight scenes, especially the ones that we recorded separately, I would read the lines constantly. And I always do more than one take, but it was very powerful. And I think from Constanza's perspective, I can understand, like, she wants to be let in, and I feel she felt like she was helpless and she was afraid because of outside influence in Mozart's life. And I think so I had to kind of come at it from a place of, well, okay, when you truly love somebody and you know deep down you want to be with them, but there's this air of fear that that very person, being his father, was going to kind of manipulate that or control him in that way. There is a level of fear she felt. And I think what I love about it is no one's perfect, and like I always saw the fights as both of them trying to express from their own points of view in different ways. Constanza is very much afraid and very, like, she can be very to herself, but at the same time she can be very strong and say how she feels. And I think that's what ultimately brings them together, is that communication, and that her showing him and actually her trusting him that he wants this just as much as she does. And I think that's what it comes down to, is the trust factor, and just seeing that development in the writing is just, in my opinion, was very beautiful. So
Thank you.
Mm.
There's a line from a Mozart pilgrimage where Constanza says she suffered. And I think some people took that to mean that her marriage to Mozart was an unhappy one. And that's not to say they don't fight, because we do tackle them having relational spats. And they have a really big one in book 2. But I actually took it to mean the the unkindness that had followed his death. Second. Oh, stupid. I can't talk. Stupid body. So I took it to mean that the suffering, because, she was on her knees, pleading that a divine power would save her husband from death, and she wanted to be with him when he passed, as much as his last thoughts were about who's going to take care of her. And so I feel like with that, to you both, in reading this story and acting out a powerful and somewhat anomaly of a relationship, why is it important to have a romantic story that tackles champion the partner who is disabled? Because, as we know, in many romantic stories where a historical figure becomes disabled or goes through trauma and pain and turmoil, there's abandonment. There is this anger and this resentment that develops. But with Constanza and Wolfgang, I never got that feeling of, I resent marrying you. I feel like they took it one step at a time and strengthened their relationship. Why do you both think their relationship withstood for 10 years so they had each other, despite the turmoil, based on what we tackle in our dramatization of their courtship?
I think it's human. I think it's the element of their relationship being so human, and I don't think it's the fact of him having those disabilities. Yes, they might occur as a challenge, but again, it's him being him, and it's him sort of living the way he is. So yeah, it's interesting because the thing that, like you said, Faith, the thing that I immediately think when I think of an old story about disabilities, Richard III, and how they paint him as a villain, and he's like a disabled character. But with Mozart, how you've written Mozart, is so human. It's so true, and everyone has the right to love, no matter who you are, no matter what you are. It's important that everyone has the right to feel.
Exactly. I agree. Darien?
Yeah, I think it's just so important that, like I said, you the way you wrote the story is with such compassion. I think that's why I think the relationship is definitely one for the ages, because there was never this feeling that she was gonna abandon him regardless of marital spats, which is quite normal, and because they'll eventually find their way together, and it's the humor. It's like Mozart's very funny, and Constanza loves music, and it's the quality time they have together. And I think that's why it's important to, if anything, if you have a significant other who is neurodivergent, support them and don't try to change them. Don't see them as a lesser than, or see them as struggling. You see them as a beautiful human being. And I think that's what I love about Constanza and Wolfgang is they uplifted each other and never once like try to put one another down. It was always uplifting, and even through their spats, they eventually found their way back. And I think that's what really makes a relationship, in my opinion, beautiful, is that there can always be humor and music and just smiling. And I don't think they suffered at all. If anything, it was beautiful. And eventually when he passes, she will always have that love for him. And yeah. So
Yeah, yeah, I agree. it's one of those situations where it's like they're, I don't know, it's like their adversities just made them cling more together rather than tear them apart, like I think most writers think they did. I mean, I was just saying to Aaron earlier, there's a story where Wolfgang, he was so worried about Constanza, she gets sick in 1785, and what happens, um, is he gets this knife stuck in his thigh, and um, and he, as we know, when Wolfgang gets unwell, he does not do so well with sickness.
Mhm.
But in this one moment, when he gets like a wound or something, Sophia was there, and he doesn't he didn't make a peep. He didn't want to wake her. He didn't even tell her, "Oh, by the way, honey, got a knife stuck in my thigh. How do you
Oh my god.
feel?"
So Mozart. It's so Mozart.
I'm
Very
okay,
much
no,
so.
I'm
Yeah.
totally good. I'm not in pain. You know, and it's things like that where you go, oh, he's just precious, you know. He's like trying to get this servant who has come in to get out of the room, and he's got a knife stuck in his thigh, all for the love of her, you know. And I think that's what made the relationship so real to me was, oh, he's so willing to, you know, to bite his tongue, you know, chew on his lip as he's in pain himself from his pencil knife.
Very stubborn man.
Mhm.
Very stubborn man. Yeah.
It's little stuff like that that makes you go, wow, you know, or the story of how he would leave little notes under her pillow, like for her
Mm.
whenever he would go out riding and she wasn't well, which I turned into their very a Valentine's Day's sort of like short storyline in I think either book 2 or 3.
Mhm.
Where, you know, like that's how much he loved her. He's like, I hope you slept well, my dearest little wife, or something. Like he would write just like this thing, like just very human things, and you're sitting there going, this is the man who wrote The Marriage of Figaro. And he's like, I hope you slept well, you know, and these little things like, I'll be back in a minute. But I hope you slept undisturbed, you know? Like
Mhm.
stuff like that that just makes him and her just so human.
Mm.
Which leads me to my next question, which is Constanza and Wolfgang, as I've said, you know, have this Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet like qualities to them. Although I would say the tides of empathy are much stronger for Constanza versus Elizabeth, and Wolfgang is too funny to be sour like Mr. Darcy. But despite despite struggling with melancholy and depression and some of his own personal struggles, what are some of the ways you both brought your own perspective to the two of them to help you when acting out the scenes they have together?
It's personal opinion, I would say. Um, for me, it's looking at the experience of me as a person being neurodiverse first, and then doing all the research into what it is like to obviously, as I said before, date on the spectrum. It's his way of looking at dating will be different to somebody that's obviously not neurodiverse, and he
Right.
has different needs, different ways of viewing the world. So for me, as somebody with autism, it was great to again relate to that, but also research into how he felt about the challenges of going through life, but also how he felt about her and how beautiful, you know, he saw her, how much he cared for her. He was sweet on the inside, no matter how stubborn he was, no matter how funny he was always there was always this sweetness to him, especially when it comes to Constanza.
Yeah, she was almost kind of his weakness a little bit. I mean, I hate to say it in
Yeah,
that way, but like she would break down the walls that he had built up, and he's like, "Well, all for the love of my wife." You know?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
This is for you as well, Darien.
Oh,
If you have anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was pretty much what Aaron said. As an actor, it's so important to research who you play. And since I had kind of a baseline of who Constanza was, with the help of Faith, which, by the way, thank you, Faith, for the extra, like, excerpts.
Of course. Of course.
I always like to read context, and that's what I loved about the writing you did was I always looked at the line before mine to get an idea. Okay, let's look at the scene. Like, for example, the scene where I'll just say spoilers.
It's all right. Read the
Spoiler
books,
warning.
please.
Yeah, do.
Oh no, spoilers, guys. Anyway, there's a scene. I have to say it was one of my favorites to record, admittedly, where they share a passionate moment in a carriage. You know the one.
Yeah, yeah.
You know the one. It's fine. No,
Yep.
but there's a reason why that's my favorite, and that kind of ties into my answer, is because I've always touched on how Constanza was very afraid of angering outside influences. For example, Mozart's father. So, as a human, like as me, Darien, I'm a big people pleaser. So I'm always afraid of pissing somebody off. And that really helped with recording a lot of those types of scenes because it's, in some ways, she is kind of not so much an over people pleaser, but it's that fear of like, she doesn't want the drama with her family as well as herself. And she knew how she was feeling for him. He was brave enough to tell her. And I had to be like, okay, how can I make this where it's like she wants to, but there's that fear of his dad's gonna come in and ruin it and sabotage it. So I had to kind of go into my little recesses of my brain and pull out what I call method acting, which is there are times where I could be a people pleaser and worry and not take chances on things. And so I really brought that to that scene where it's like finding those ways of, oh, what if it doesn't work? It's always the what ifs, you never know. So I found she reminded me a lot of myself in terms of very afraid to anger people, not take that leap of faith, faithfully yours. Take the leap of faith.
Yeah.
Um,
That scene was really hard to write too because like it's the typical moment of like you want them to have that kiss, but I was like, it's not time yet, and Wolfgang's like, yes, it is.
Wolfgang's like, hold my not tankard, the thingy, the mug.
My ween.
Yeah.
But yeah.
My
But yeah, it was.
It's like, oh, George. Not time yet for the great kiss. That doesn't happen until chapter 18.
Yeah, but it was worth it. That scene alone is like I love the project as a whole, but I really like that scene because emotionally it really delved into especially Constanza's mindset because we've set up, like I said, where she's afraid of his father and the things he could do and the things he's already saying and putting into his mind. So
Right.
I wanted to like showcase that where it's like she's afraid of angering somebody. I'm afraid of angering somebody. This is perfect for me because that's how I kind of insert myself because as somebody who is neurodivergent plus an anxious person and needs reassurances and whatnot. It was a perfect mix for myself. I can kind of insert that part into her because that's what she reminds me of. Is she doesn't want to make someone upset, but at the end of the
Right.
day, I liked how she had to kind of overcome that herself.
Yeah,
And
it is interesting. They both do have people-pleasing tendencies.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
he absolutely does. He's like,
Mhm.
I was such an ass to you at the dance. Here's flowers. And it's just like,
Yeah.
I'm on one knee. Don't slap me, please. You know, and he just like he has his more grand gestures, and then she's like, she's more practical, and he's like, I did something wrong. Here's some chocolate.
yeah.
You know.
Hmm.
And it's so fascinating, though, really, to see that dynamic play out where they find each other in their traumas, and then they
Yeah.
both overcome it together throughout book one and throughout the rest of the series as well.
Hmm.
But speaking of that, it is no secret that Constanza Mozart has been seen in an undesirable light for ages by so many people, and I could complain about this. I do. I really do. But with that in mind, how do you hope your performance might help people see her differently?
So, as always with any female in history, uh, I could say this. It's sad where, especially with someone like Constanza, she was always not seen in a great light or just seen as somebody that she never was. Seen as the other woman or seen as a flus. It's just many falsehoods. And as an actor, you can only hope that your performance can make someone feel. And I can only hope that my interpretation of Constanza shows that she is more than just a name. She's more than a wife. She's somebody who helped carry a legacy for decades. And I feel like she embodied overcoming trauma, grief, loss, and still maintained to keep Mozart's legacy positive and not tainted. And I hope that myself I showed that she has strength because a lot of I've noticed women in history nobody really looks at one's strength unless it's a man. And it's true, sadly.
Right.
But I want I want her strength to be seen, and that was the biggest theme for myself as an actor and acting her out. I wanted to showcase that strength of hers. So especially since it's voice acting, I wanted my voice to I wanted it to carry that strength, that determination that she had throughout the series and with her family and just her courtship with Mozart. And um, yeah, I just wanted to point out that she is more than the name itself. She for me is an embodiment of support, empathy, and strength, you know?
Absolutely. And on her side and her part in this, how might she compare to, say, like a figure like Eliza Hamilton? And why, after 200 years, do you think that, with the story of Wolfgang's life and the significance of her role in preserving his legacy, why has she been left behind, and why should that no longer be the case? I feel she deserves a place in history as much as Nannerl and Mozart, which is, you know, not. I don't want Constanza romanticized, but I think she deserves a place too in the story, as much as Nannerl is getting her dues.
Mm-hmm. Um, I feel like she shouldn't be forgotten in history because she's just as influential. Um, Empathy, especially in those days, is pretty non-existent, especially if you're going into like 1700s and whatnot with everything that happened. And she has contributed a lot to society as well. She supports the arts. She loves opera and she loves her husband's music. Like, I feel like she deserves a place in history just like everyone else because she loved someone, was being so empathetic towards somebody who is neurodivergent, and you don't hear about that back in those days, right? So I feel like she deserves a seat at the table, and I think she, just like any person, deserves a place where you empathize, you have a heart, and you're understanding. And that's the biggest thing about her. She's been understanding of Mozart and who he is, and just understanding of everyone. She's, even with her own issues with her family, she still tries her best. And I think I'd rather she not get left behind. I want her in the same room as anybody else in history because she, just like anyone else, has contributed to society.
Exactly. And I agree, and I feel that strongly. To be honest with you, and I think this is where I will clash with some people who are touting this romanticization of Nanorel, currently in this modern era. I did not connect with Nanorel the same way I did with Constanza. It's like Constanza was there at the funeral, there through every fever, every fall, every financial crisis, and I sit there and I'm like, and where was everybody else? Not there. So I really feel like she had first-hand account, really, of, this was my husband's life and this is what happened, and I put more stock into her words and the things that she left behind than anyone else, because that was her husband. She would have known him best. So this is a bit of a shift, but this is for you both. Since being a part of this project, what are some of the things you have enjoyed learning about these historical figures? Because here's a little fact of the project. It is based on as much historical truth as I could get my hands on. Even some of the dialogue you both have read comes from their actual words. It comes from very real letters and recorded conversations, not everything, but the mass majority of them. So, I'm kind of wondering, out of all these things, what have you enjoyed the most? Like either fact-wise or scene-wise, or, like, what was enjoyable? There's always challenges, but were there any joys in the project?
Yeah, I loved the thing I loved about Mozart was the balance of his determination, his stubbornness, and how sweet he was. Everyone outside they don't see the private life of Mozart. They see, obviously, as I said before, the public life. And it was nice to be able to actually dive into that, research into that, learn about what he was like when he was not working. And also, I still have to say the funniest thing was, as I said before, the whole way he just pleases people, right? And the my favorite scene has to be they have the argument before the dance, and Mozart obviously goes, shall we dance? As soon as the argument is just
Yeah.
finished, and it was funny just to sort of break off like that in that way because again he's going to try and carry on and trying to please them now that the argument's over. He is a sweetheart, and I find that very endearing.
Yeah. Darien, what about you?
That one scene, that was funny because she's like, "Is it resignation?" I still remember the line
Revolution.
too.
Yeah,
Is it resignation or revolution?
Let's have some cake.
yeah, yeah,
Like, let's have.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And she,
Sorry.
I that whole scene, I just want to like, I guess, just quickly touch on that. It was very funny having to kind of tap into a She was kind of about it, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I feel like Constanza can be very sassy when she needs to be. She's like,
Oh, yeah.
well, well, Mozart, is it resignation or revolution? Like, it's like,
And he's like, I'm gonna go cut some cake. Look, there's
mm,
chocolate.
mm-hmm.
He's a
Like,
he's a total avoidant in that scene, and he's like,
Yeah.
going
yeah,
Got to be careful now.
like that's my wife,
Yeah.
yeah,
and I knew then I wanted to marry her.
yeah. I think that was kind of like the fun. That I will say that was the funny part of that was just like he's like, yeah, I'm gonna avoid. I'm gonna not answer. We're just gonna keep it moving.
I hear my name being called Sophia.
And it was just cool again to see in those like behind the glass, her own struggles, her so frustrated that he always overworks himself. And so
Yes.
it was kind of in her own way, kind of telling him like settle down, but done in such a well.
Right. Right. Yeah,
So,
I honestly, like I told Aaron, I love it whenever you're like matching him like beat for beat in that scene, and he's just scrambling. He's like, get a foothold, and she's like, I'm not gonna let you have one, because she's just matching him like word for word. He's trying to squirm his way out of it, and she's like, we're not done, Mister Wolfgang. She uses the full name, and it's like Wolfgangus Theodulfus Amadeus Mozart.
yeah, yeah, and it was really cool. I love that scene. But I think what I loved about learning just about both of them as a whole is just the trials and tribulations they both went through. And I I always make it my mission when doing projects that involve these sorts of figures or anything is to put a bit of myself but not too much of myself, because ultimately I'm telling someone else's story, and that's a big thing I learned in acting is when you tell someone else's story, you look into things. And it was very important to me that I preserve her story because it's a very important one. And what I liked about learning about Constanza was her layers. Because I think people saw her as a hee, like very giggly, which can be true. But I wanted to give her determination and strength and resilience. And also, I have to say, you don't hear her say a curse word until nearing the later chapters. That's another thing. She has her
Yeah.
moments where she will snap.
Oh
And
yeah.
it,
Yeah, she and there are some moments too, comic books 2 and 3, where she really gets to Wolfgang. I often have Wolfgang refer to her as a lioness, because that's how I thought of Constanza when I began writing her. She definitely goes full lioness in some later chapters in the book.
Absolutely.
That is for sure. Not on him, but on the people around him. It's just like, you hurt my little husband, and she's just cracking her knuckles, going, okay, boxing gloves are coming out.
oh yeah,
Wolfgang's like a little puppy who's like been kicked one too many times. Not that he can't fight for himself, and he does fight. He will fight for her specifically. But when he gets knocked down, she's like, okay, cracking the knuckles. It's time for me to, bring out the claws.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I mean when I want her to be a part of that history, because she was always seen as like a floozy-ish, like
Very
not
ditzy.
almost if not intelligent, but is far from the truth. And
Yeah.
she's very intelligent, but she's very practical, and it was very interesting as somebody who lacks practicality with her own neurodivergence to step into the shoes of someone who was very practical, things very logical, and it was a fun exercise for me to kind of, okay, let's not be Darien for a day. When I play Constanza, I have to actually get in her mindset and be very level-headed, which I am in real life. But she's a little more level-headed than me.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
Yeah. More so than me as well, I would say. She definitely always appeared to me to be the one that was like, when Wolfgang would be all impulsive or very naive about something, she's like, what did we say? It's like we go
Yeah.
and Wolfgang's like, right.
Yeah.
What you said.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what, like, another scene that I love was her helping him find something for the opera, because he was stressed he couldn't afford or find anything, and it was just her level-headedness throughout that scene. It's like, hey, it's all right, that was my father's, and he was worried about taking, like, that garb, and that's where she's like, no, go ahead, it's fine. Like, that's what I like about it. She's very go with the flow. She just wants to help, and
Yeah.
I think that was that's what I loved about learning about her and why she's such an important figure in history, is because throughout all her own trials, she maintained empathy. And I think that's just what we need in the world today is empathy. And she had that from Mozart. She never changed him. She never tried to belittle him. She gave him room to blossom and supported him for the years they were married. So yeah.
Yeah. Since we've been talking about it during this, I want to bring up that beautiful particular scene you were talking about. Again, there were so many I love. And I swear to you that more is coming for our audio drama. It's just been a very crazy time recently. But as we've been talking, Wolfgang and Constanza go to a prestigious actors' estate where they have a fight that precedes the dance sequence. And Wolfgang is very blunt about his incessant working. And Constanza, absolutely, beautifully, completely and utterly just matches him in that scene. And my question then is, when you were both reading the dance scene, what was going through your heads about their budding relationship? Because they have a fight, and it's not the now I'm mad at you, and let's have a screaming match. Wolfgang, as I said, isn't avoidant in this scene, and Constanza's just not backing down. You know, it's a why aren't you fighting for yourself? So from both your perspectives on that scene in your respective roles, what went through your heads? What was the process of bringing them to life in that moment that is vulnerable for them? And how did it inform choices made for the remainder of your scripts?
So, for all the scenes, I always read all through it. And for that scene in particular, it was diving deep into what Mozart was trying to want. It was, what his wants were, why he was so het up in that scene. And again, stubbornness. A lot of stubbornness, because that definitely showed in that scene. And then also, he does, at the end of that scene, you can see him feeling terrible for how he acted. So there's like this level of come down from that emotion and him going, what did I just say? And it was interesting playing that sort of element of, okay, I'm going to say this, and then slowly dialing it down to where he was completely sort of stumped to what he actually said himself and felt bad for what he said, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and Aaron and I, you and I talked about this briefly when we did our Instagram live, but Darien, I'm kind of curious about your perspective on that scene. Aaron said that he thought that was the moment where Wolfgang fell for Constanza. And we don't really have a moment where we know that they've fallen for each other, like in a typical romance, because their romance isn't typical. But do you think that was the moment that she fell? Or what moment do you think that she actually fell for him? Because I almost think that's the moment where she was more hesitant. But like I'm the author and the writer, and so my perspective will differ from you guys's. So I'm kind of curious your take on that whole scene.
So it was interesting because as I was recording this, I was following the trajectory of just kind of like that build up, and I like how it was a slow burn element because slow burn, personally for me, I used to hate slow burn, but that's just from my own personal things. But now I've come to enjoy it again because it's what makes the progression more natural and more organic. I would say deep down at the dance she was feeling something. Um, Falling for him at the dance, I don't know personally. But she definitely was feeling more than just care. It was getting to a point of more. And
Right.
and I would say during that scene, I had to go into basically not so much mama bear mode, but almost emulate mama bear mode and be like, So I'm just like, okay, reading this as Constanza, how is she going to, in a way, say to Mozart, this is how I'm feeling, but not be so direct? Because Constanza's very good at choosing her words carefully.
Yes.
Sometimes. So when it came to the line, well, Mozart, is it resignation or revolution? I like to add a bit of a tension there. Because it's ultimately she's giving that question of, well, do you see what I'm saying, or are you still gonna fight me? So
and he's so literal. He's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was important to highlight, like, she's not afraid to, use her voice where it matters, and it was fun for me as an actor because as Darien, it's hard to use my voice every now and then. I'm not afraid to now, but it was cool to step into the shoes of someone from history who isn't afraid to use her voice and who isn't afraid to fight properly for what matters. And because the significance of that fight is actually very important, because this is where Mozart was working himself to the freaking bone as a composer, and he wouldn't stop. Like, he was a workaholic. That's known, and he was composing for different orchestras and whatnot. And it's like he doesn't have an off switch, and that's what frustrated Constanza the most. So I think that's what makes me sad when people try to play her as this unintelligent floozy or just someone who doesn't have strength. She has strength, and she's not afraid to say to the man that she would soon call her beloved, hey, you need to smarten up a wee bit. So I liked how the fights, or the spats even, were written, because they weren't written in malice, or they weren't written cold. There's tension. And I wanted to really be like, okay, as Constanza, let me just add that tension because Constanza's pissed. And she had to come at it from like, when you're pissed at your significant other, but you're scared to use your words because it might be mean. So I'm like, okay, acting exercises, let's step into a mindset of you're pissed, but you don't want to like outwardly say you're pissed. So that was a tricky part for me, but I hope it was received well, because I mean, well, is it resignation or revolution? So
I mean, I feel like it came across like incredibly well. Like I said, you reminded me, and there's two things that your characterization of Constanza are like really embodied well. In the moments where she's very kind and compassionate, total Cinderella, because I feel like Wolfgang like described her as the Cinderella of her era. He's like, father,
Yeah.
the mother spoils the other sisters and gives nothing to Constanza. All she does is cook and clean and da da. And I'm like, is she basically Cinderella? And then also you remind me very much of the way that the actress for Queen Charlotte
Oh yeah.
in some of the fight scenes, because Queen Charlotte was a big inspiration for this book as well, and particularly for the characterization of Constanza and Wolfgang. That was a big help in how to characterize a relationship that is that deals with mental health difficulties. That strength that Queen Charlotte just shows in the moments where she's like, fight with me, fight for me. And I thought to myself, she's not arguing with George in these scenes. She's fighting for him in these scenes. And I wanted that with Constanza and Wolfgang. I was like, they're the same kind of relationship. Why can't we give them those dues? And so that scene played so beautifully. It's one of my favorites. It's actually currently out. I think it's in chapter 6. So that's out on Spotify. Please catch up. I am working myself as well to get episode 7 out, because there were some beautiful moments. One of my favorites being the Kingdom of Back scene.
Oh,
we
yeah.
have only
That's
3
such a joy.
questions. We have 3 questions left, but if you want to expand on that, you too, because I love the Kingdom of Back scene. That is my favorite, beautiful, intimate moment that they get to have, where you really see them, I think, falling for each other.
It was the time that Mozart wasn't afraid to share his love language, and I felt that the Kingdom of Back was sort of him sharing a part of himself to Constanza. It was a little thing that he used to make, obviously, when he was younger, and he just loved to play words by saying them backwards. And it was very childlike in a way, but it was his love language. And it was him going, this is my special interest. Do you want to join in on the fun too? And it was beautiful. It was really beautiful to do that scene. I really had great fun.
And he
Love that
really,
scene.
he really invites her kind of into his world, and kind of says, you know, do you want to share, you know, and I think that's the one thing that we as autistics are always afraid of, is that we're always shut down for our special interests or the things that we are so passionate about. But I wanted to write a scene where he was kind of like, well, do you want to share? I hate to use the Tarzan analogy, but you know the line in you know, come now and see my world. I wanted a moment like that, where he kind of says, well, this is what I see, you know, and she doesn't shame him for it.
She accepts him.
Whenever you want to say, Darien, I want to hear you as well.
Yeah, the Kingdom of Back was, I think, a beautiful metaphor. How I read it was a metaphor of Mozart's, because we all have an inner child, so it was almost like his inner child. And the Kingdom of Back was a beautiful scene, and how I would giggle as I was doing the recording. I'd have to pause and be like, "Oh," like it's adorable, and there's such child innocence in that. There's like a inner child innocence, and something you don't see every day. And I loved how it was written, where it's as Aaron said, he's showing his love language and what makes him happy. And they role played, and then he's like, you'll be the queen of the Kingdom of Beck. And I think that, I think that's what I loved about that scene the most, was it was like setting the groundwork for what would be their courtship and relationship to come. And he wasn't afraid to show that side, and it was, you know, it was like I really like those types of things in stories where it's like running away from your issues where it counts. So I liked how they kind of escaped from that. Folks, don't take this as me saying run from your issues, but sometimes it's okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's all right. And it's so funny. There's another moment too in book 3 I think it's either book 3 or book 2. One of the 2 recent books that are out. There is another moment where she, you know, like he has this imagination that he's some great Arthurian like knight, and they're in a field just playing with sticks. But his imagination is so vibrant and wild that, you know, it's they're fighting over treasure, and they're rolling around in the grass, and, you know, Pimperl, their dog, is just like it's a really sweet scene, and it's not something that I often I like the idea that these kinds of stories, those moments have to hit just right. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah.
not something you can do all the time, but when they do happen, they hit so well. So yeah, that's one of my favorites as well. And let's see. Here it is. So empathy was imperative when it came to the characterization of Constanza, as we talked about very briefly. The more I read about her, the more I saw how much she fought for him in life with patience and compassion, as much as she fought for his story when he passed on. The way that she fought for his legacy, his reputation, and more. How did that aspect of her help you to understand the dynamics of the relationship better?
I think it helped understand because as somebody who is always believes that empathy is important in someone's life, it helped me to understand in the sense of how she supported him, because people can easily say they're very empathetic until they start judging people. And
Yeah.
it was important to me as an actor and as somebody who is an empath. Okay, how did she support Mozart? What was her, not so much method, but what was her way? Because we all have different ways of empathy and showing it. So I wanted to know how she did it. And it was pretty eerily similar to who I am, which is she was so encouraging of his passions and pursuits. However, what I loved about that same level of empathy was she wasn't afraid to tell him, hey, you need to take a breather, my darling, you know? Like, it's. I sometimes
Right.
slip into her character, don't mind me. But yeah, she's not afraid to tell him to slow down. Even with how stubborn he is, she's not afraid to be like, Luffy, you need to slow down, you know? It's, so that's what I think it's so imperative, and I feel like it's a lesson to be taught where you need to be empathetic, and empathy is so important, especially when we're talking about neurodivergence and it being such a broad and wide spectrum. It's so important to just not see somebody as helpless or as they can't do anything, but whereas they can, but encourage them to do it their way. And I think that's I think that's truly what the biggest thing is in their relationship was she always encouraged Mozart to be himself, to have those moments of just humor and playtime. And I think that's what I really enjoyed learning and adding that empathy was, especially that Kingdom of Beck scene is a big example, is she indulged in his playtime, in role playing. That serves as a metaphor. That kingdom itself is a metaphor of their relationship where it stood the test of time through every storm, every argument that they've ever had. That kingdom still stood
I agree.
and still does today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for our final question, and I thank you both for your patience and your longevity on doing this with me. Why might now be the time that this take on not only Constanza and Wolfgang, but other people in history who were disabled deserve to have their stories told in this manner of such empathy? I mean, I know my views on why. I believe because right now, currently, we have people who plainly forget that disability has been the heart of the world since the Grecian period and before that. But stigma and prejudice made it impossible for people like us, and I may remind you that disabled, the 3 of us on this podcast are autistic.
Yep.
You know, we're not afraid to talk about it. We are. But prejudice made it impossible for us to exist. And it's here again, in 2025. and we've almost gone backwards. And it hurts us. It hurts people like us, and it hurts us. So why does it matter, in your opinions, both of you, that we don't just have modern stories about the disabled, but stories from history too, where we tackle the hard issues and we showcase it in the most realistic manner possible?
I think it's important to tell those stories because it shows how far we've come. Yes, we've still got work to do, but it shows how far we've come from then and how much it's now improved since then. But also for us, for people with neurodiversity, it's nice because it gives you a chance to know that you're not alone and that like in this world there were people that have come before us that face challenges with their autism or what other type of disability. Um, it shows that there's hope. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's why we need to sort of reevaluate parts of history again and look into people to see if they were on the spectrum. I think it'd be an interesting case study to look into.
I agree. 100%.
Yeah. I think it's just, as I've been saying, just over the course of the interview, neurodivergence was always seen, and I can remember watching different pieces of media, and the biggest thing when it comes to neurodivergence, being autism or just any form of it, it is always looked at as such a with negative connotations. And
Yeah.
I think and hope that this project can influence a discussion, a much needed one, that there are probably many different people in history that may have been neurodivergent, but it was never studied or it was never thought of. And I think if this gives an open opportunity to re-look into different people and maybe find those, then I hope that it serves as a lesson that neurodivergence doesn't mean that somebody isn't like you or me. We very much are. We are just learning differently. We're not, and I think that's the beauty of somebody who's neurodivergent is we learn differently, and yet we still deserve a seat at the table. And there has to be a lot more representation, even in media today, for folks who are neurodivergent. There should be more opportunities, and for everybody, because we're in a very divisive time right now. And I want to take a moment to say, if you feel seen by this project, we see you. And on behalf of everyone here, you are valid, you are seen, you are heard, no matter where you sit on the spectrum of neurodiversity, you are still a human being and you're a beautiful soul. Never let anybody tell you otherwise. So yeah.
We are not an epidemic, and I don't get, loud about anything, but there have been some thoughts and views recently, and I mentioned it at the first part of our talk with Aaron, but there are people who are touting things that are going to make us feel like we are a problem when we're not. We've always been here. We've been here since before there was ever a word to describe who we were. And unfortunately, I think there are some people who need to look back and back and back in the history and go, we put those people away. Why? Because we were afraid of what was different. And I think it's time that we stopped being afraid and allowed the Mozarts and the Constanzas and the Beethovens and the Henrik Gottfried Bachs to exist in society as the beautiful souls that they are. I'm surrounded by them. Because in the words of my friend Jack Morby, autism is something you've never even seen before. It can be something you have never seen before. We are not just one, we are not this or that, we are not one thing. We are something you may have never seen before, and that is beautiful. And with that, I will take us to a close and say, Darien, Aaron, thank you so much for your patience and for being a part of this. Where might people be able to find you social media-wise? Both of you.
So for me, probably my Facebook, which is just Aaron Ralph, and on there'll be all my links to my Spotlight, my Instagram, everything's on there, and you can follow it via that.
All right, absolutely, and I will post those below for people to follow for sure.
Well, I'll just just scrolls down a bunch of links. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm not. I am not that vain, folks. You are more than happy to find me. I have a voice acting Twitter. That's x.com/DarianHTVA. And that's basically where I post all my performance announcements, my roles, and everything. I also have a TikTok, which is also Darien HTVA, where I post a lot of skits. And I go live Fridays and Saturdays. I'll be live Sunday for the game I'm currently streaming, Love and Deep Space. And it's going to be a birthday event. So I'll be live in the morning at twitch.tv/DarianHTVA. So yeah.
Alrighty, and with that, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody. Hopefully, you can follow me, of course. I am Faith Jactor Official on Instagram. Of course, you can follow the Faithfully Yours official book page as well on Instagram. We have a website for the book. It is on, and I will say this, when my posts on Instagram say the books are international, that means they are international. Italy, Canada, UK, USA, Poland, I think. I mean, wherever you are in the world, you can get Faithfully Yours Mozart. You can listen to us on Spotify and my YouTube, of course, Coffee and Comics Nerd, where, all this will be linked below. This will also be up on the YouTube page, so there will be many links to many different things. But, just give us a search, give us a follow. We need eyes, mouths, ears. We need everything on this. we need some help to get this project out here because it has been out for a couple of years. And the traction's not great. Help me, please, because I really truly want to do good with Faithfully Yours Mozart. I want to do something for anybody out there who's ever felt unseen. Faithfully Yours Mozart is for you. And with that, I have been Faith Jacobs, and I will see you all on the flip side.
See you all later.
See ya.